Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to, excuse me, good start. Welcome to the Social Care and Tackling Poverty Service Transformation Committee for July. The first item on the agenda is the election of Vice Chair for the municipal year 2023-2024. At the start, I'd like to nominate Councillor Leslie Walton as Vice Chair. Can I say, and be happy to second that?
Yes, I can second that.
That's great, thank you. Can I have any other nominations? No, okay. So do we need to obviously need to vote on that then, Alison, don't we?
Yes, please. Yeah, if we can have a
Okay.
show of hands, please, for
Yeah,
Councillor
show of
Leslie Walton.
Thanks, Alison.
Yeah, that's unanimous, Chair.
That's great. Okay, thank you. Congratulations, Les.
Thank you, I think.
Excuse me. Okay. Just to say a quick word, just to apologise for not being there in person today. Normally I'd always be there to chair, but as you can probably hear, I've got a touch of the lurgy and I didn't think it would be fair to come in and generously pass it on. So this is a one-off for me chairing from home today. Okay, the second item on the agenda then is apologies for absence.
Apologies from Councillor Angela O'Connor.
Okay, thanks, Alison. Third item is disclosures of personal prejudicial interests. Okay, and the fourth item then are the minutes from the meeting in June. Are we happy with those minutes as a true record? So be happy to move those minutes?
Yes, I can move those minutes, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor. And somebody to second that? I can second that anyway. I'll second that, Alison, that's fine. And then we're on to item 5 then, which is the refresh of the Swansea Council in tackling poverty strategy. I've got us down as for information, Alison. So is Leo Anthony there to discuss it, or is it just literally for information today?
Yeah, Lee's here to go through the report.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, Lee, do you want to take over?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. The report that I'm bringing you today is relating to our current work that's ongoing to refresh the Council's tackling poverty strategy. I won't go through the report line by line, of course, but just want to give you an update, basically. So it is for information, but I think it's also worth flagging that this is an opportunity for all parties, for everyone involved. They've got the opportunity to get involved in that refresh work, and I'll just give a bit of information about what that looks like. So just a bit of the background. The strategy that we currently have was published in 2017. So that, as you can imagine, requires a bit of refresh. Our original plans to look at it were affected during the COVID-19 pandemic and, of course, with the cost of living crisis itself, which has meant that we've had to look at a different way of doing things. There's the background documents includes a link to the current strategy, so I won't go through that, but in the report there's a few of the items that kind of is our starting point, in terms of our definition and our vision, if you like, for poverty in Swansea. The report just goes into a little bit more detail about our sort of current position and the emerging findings of our work that has been ongoing for a couple of months now, but we're planning to continue with engagement and co-production activities throughout the summer. And we'll be taking some of that information through the approval process and then through a public consultation around October and November time. So, but just to kind of give everyone a bit of an idea about the work we've done, first of all, and what's involved in the refresh. So that includes things like document reviews, desktop research, planning against some of the strategic drivers that influence tackling poverty, such as not only the Council's corporate plan, but things like the Audit Wales National Review Time for Change. Alignment with other initiatives that obviously drive or influence tackling poverty in Swansea, such as the Human Rights City Initiative, of which tackling poverty is one of the key themes in that area. So obviously there's a lot of strong links there. Input from our networks and forums. We're heavily involved in our partnership arrangements and working with our partners, such as through the Swansea Poverty Partnership. So we will, and we are currently engaging with all of our partners and organisations to support us. Obviously, a lot of data analysis. We are collating information and statistics from national dashboards, such as the Data Cymru Wales National Dashboard on Poverty. We will be shortly launching a survey, a digital form that we can share widely for people and communities to be able to give us their sort of insights and priorities for what the tackling poverty strategy should be targeting. So this will give us some really good insights on what people and communities feel we should be focusing on in the new refresh strategy. And also over the next few weeks, particularly, we'll be doing a lot of co-production events. We've done quite a few engagement activities, such as the regional unpaid carers event on the 6th of July. We were there, we were talking to people, and we were trying to get people's views to feed into the work. But we're planning a number of events throughout the summer. We're currently looking at an open public event in the Pop-Up Wales space in the Quadrant for around about middle of August. So I'm hoping we'll be able to share details of that soon. But this is all about basically capturing as much insight and doing as much co-production activity up front. I would, in the report, just very quickly like to draw attention to some of the emerging findings. And in section 2 of the report, particularly section 2.3 and 2.4, just to kind of show you some of the headings that we're starting to identify from this work. And within those headings, we're looking at this as a journey that people go on. And throughout different stages of that journey, people will require different kind of support or different levels of support and intervention. So things like that early intervention to prevent poverty from happening, dealing with people who are in crisis and helping those in the greatest need, reducing the impacts of poverty and the impacts that poverty has on people as well. Helping to improve personal prosperity and give people the tools, the skills, the confidence they need to work themselves, to work out of poverty for themselves. And then ensuring that recovery from poverty is done in a sustainable way and mitigates the risk of people falling back into poverty and requiring support and services again in the future. So we're kind of using that as the model, as the framework, if you like, for organising some of our thoughts and trying to get some of those key themes to come out, and we can focus then on the right actions to address those themes. But based on the evidence we've collected to date and some of those initiatives I've already mentioned, some of the things we're already starting to identify as starting to list in 2.4, but this is certainly not extensive. This is the tip of the iceberg, really. Creating co-produced pathways out of poverty. One of the things very keen is to really establish what the journey looks like in a way that we can help people navigate, help services work out the best way to intervene and to provide that support. So those pathways out of poverty and how partners and other organisations can support us to help people. Homelessness has been a key theme in the past, and we'll continue to be working with our colleagues in housing and other areas to develop those preventative measures. Access to affordable and energy efficient homes is something that's come through strongly in the corporate plan this year, and something that I know there's a lot of investment from our colleagues in housing to generate those units and to put that those options in front of people. More employment opportunities and support to improve employability. Obviously, our employability programs are already doing great work, but we know there's a lot more work coming into the area through the Swansea Bay City Deal and other initiatives, and it's an opportunity for us to help people in the early steps on that pathway to good, sustainable, meaningful employment. Access to and coordination between services is going to be really important. We want it to be seamless. We want, from the individual's point of view, that sort of moving between different partners and different departments to be a very much a seamless process, so that it doesn't influence or impact on people themselves. So how can the services themselves improve the way they talk to each other and collaborate on initiatives? Digital inclusion, obviously a big challenge, and something that we've already started looking at based on Audit Wales's last report in December. So we'll be looking at that in a lot of detail. And then something that I think has come through very clearly more recently is around the stigma and discrimination relating to poverty, the issues that people are facing in terms of the inequalities, the barriers that they're facing to getting the support and the help they need. So those are the sort of the initial priorities that are starting to come through. Obviously, as we continue to go on this process, we'll discover more, we'll build our evidence, and we'll build our cases then for the next step, really, of the refresh of the strategy, which, as the document goes on to say, over the next few months, we will be taking that through approvals, we'll be doing that formal consultation, And then when we're able to formally publish the strategy, once the approval process ends towards the end of the calendar year, we'll be able to really get into detail of co-producing action plans and bringing communities and people with lived experience of poverty closer to our planning to address all of those priorities. So that was it in terms of the reference in the email to just anybody can really get involved. I say not so much an action per se, but to just remind people that we do want everybody's views, elected members, community members, other council departments. So just in section 4.2 of the report, I just state that if anybody does wish to contribute, they can get in touch with the Tackling Poverty Development team, and we're happy to kind of take views and take that forward. That was all I was going to cover for the report today, but of course, Chair, happy to answer any questions the group may have. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks very much for that. I got Councillor Leslie Walton.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks. Sorry, I've forgotten your first name. I do apologise. Anyway, thanks for that. I was wondering, I might have missed this, but two organisations I'm thinking of that need to be included. One is the Poverty Truth Commission, which I know at the moment is currently looking for a facilitator, which obviously is a great step forward really to getting that established. The other one, which I think is not quite so easy, and I know we have been working with them, and that's the credit union. I was at one time, I was very involved, but I've sort of taken a step back because one of the issues I think with credit unions, it's once they become more of an established place on the high street, I don't think they've then got quite the same local touch as they used to do when it was far more run by volunteers. And for me, I perceive that's probably quite a big barrier for some people who desperately need to make use of things like credit unions, but it's a barrier to them getting to them. So I'm wondering whether behind the scenes there's more work being done to make them more localised, to have a more localised presence. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, very happy to come back on that. And certainly, Amy and I can answer a bit with the credit union. I think just to come back to your first point about the Poverty Truth Commission, yes, just totally agree. They are absolutely a key player in our work to bring lived experience and the voice of people with lived experience closer to this refresh of the strategy. And my colleague Anthony Richards has been very closely working with that group, working with the Swansea CVS, who are running that, facilitating that group as well. So we are bringing their voice and using the commissioners to help us with the development of this strategy refresh. And I think we do want to make sure not just the commissioners themselves, but it opens a gateway to other people with lived experience who can add their voice to what we're doing. So on the first point, yes, Councillor, totally agree. They're a key group for us, and we've already started that process. Just in terms of the next question, I don't know if Amy wants to come in on that, because we can follow up on that.
Thank you. Yeah, good afternoon. Sorry, I don't know if the camera can see us today, but yeah, Amy Hawkins, Head of Adult Services and Tackling Poverty. We've just in relation to credit unions, we've recently refreshed our contact with them on a strategic level. That said, we are already engaged with them through our Poverty Partnership Forum, as already been referenced. So, but we wanted to revisit the actions we committed to in the Promoting Affordable Credit Policy, which this committee worked on a couple of years ago and we signed off. And it was one of the key actions was around working with the credit union. So as I say, we've revisited that recently. There's a number of actions planned in terms of just promoting affordable credit options to people, including credit unions as an option. So we wouldn't necessarily bring this through the group, but we'll certainly be raising that via our cabinet member as well for tackling poverty and bringing through some actions that way. So yeah, it's very timely and it is a key piece of work that we're refocusing on. So thank you.
Thanks both.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. Really appreciate that. Some good points there, Les. Councillor Jardine.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much for the report. I was just wondering, ultimately, I believe employability is what we're aiming for. But there are several things that were mentioned: homelessness, poverty, the barriers to work, the stigma. Are we having some sort of a let's say, holistic approach. Because only yesterday I was saying to someone, you know, the idea of getting a job is fine. That's what we generally want. But if we are struggling with a leaking roof or a sick child or something like that, because I think we support people in a silo fashion. I'm sorry, I can't think of the right word. But we think, okay, what we need to do is help you get a job. And so that's what we pull all the stops out for. But we don't allow for the issues that the person is having. And so I was just wondering, will the strategy take into account it's not just about finding a job, it's about being able to keep it and to continue living at the same time as well.
Very happy to come back on that one, Councillor. Yeah, I totally agree. And it's some of the work that we've already started to identify through the employability programs that we run. I know from, for instance, the hub that we run in the Quadrant, which we this year was starting to open on a Saturday. We've seen a lot more footfall, and we've seen a lot more examples of people coming in with, for instance, you helped us get an interview for a job, but I could lose my house by Monday. What do I do? And it's those sort of collaborative processes that we have to really look at and make sure that they're reinforced, and that connection between the different teams and the departments that are supporting people is strong. So that, like you say, in those examples, we're looking holistically. We're looking at it from a strengths-based point of view, and we're trying our best to put all the support in place necessary to make these things sustainable. I think you're absolutely right. It's great to help some people, and there's great stories that we can share from our teams. Great to help people to get that job, but it's making it sustainable, making it an ongoing support. And that's why I think we use the term helping to improve people's prosperity. It's not just a quick win. It's about helping people to become stronger and more self-reliant so that they can build on that and achieve the life that they want. So yeah, I think that's definitely got to be a key principle that will underpin our strategy refresh. Thank you.
Is that okay, Yvonne? You okay with that?
Sorry, Chair. Yes, I am. Thanks very much for I'll just keep an eye and see if the holistic approach does actually happen.
Okay.
Thanks very much, Bill.
Councillor Gwilliam,
Is me, Kerry.
you keep
I
that.
just,
Go on. Sorry, I'll carry on.
it's all right. We're sorry. We're in the Liberty Stadium, so we're sharing a laptop. But I only wanted to come in really to reassure Yvonne that from the poverty team, the employability team particularly, they really do provide a wraparound service. They take a long time very often to get people into work, because a lot of the people that we support, our mentors support, are a long way from being ready. Because like you said, how can you possibly be in the right frame of mind to have a job if you can't put food on the table, if you can't put electric on, do you know what I mean? So, and for many people we work with, they are such a long way from being ready for work for a multitude of reasons. And I think that's where these teams excel, you know, in really sort of using, like Lee just said, you know, they will have quite a good level of understanding of welfare rights and everything, but they pull on their colleagues who are the experts in it, the local area coordinators, you know, everybody that's in the team, lifelong learning, lots of people, we can get on courses prior to being ready for a job, you know, but we really do hold hands and take a long time. And I think that, and every now and again, I send stories around, you know, of everything, and we'll continue to do that. But honestly, it's a fabulous service, and we definitely are doing that holistic approach.
Thanks very much, Alison.
Yeah. Thanks, Alison. Okay, Councillor Lawson.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to ask along the similar lines of joining up services, whether we were also working alongside mental health services as well.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Happy to come back. I think we've identified wellbeing and mental health has been one of those common impacts that poverty has. So there's definitely a strong need to make sure we connect. We are working obviously with our partners, with the third sector. We're bringing a much closer relationship to the population health work that the Health Board have been driving. So there's definitely a lot of connections in there. I think what we need to try and work out now is that strengthening some of those collaborative ways of working to just build on the work that goes on. A lot of people work really well, and we've got those connections, as Alison said, you know, like the local area coordinators who can help us to connect into those local avenues of support and to help people improve their well-being. But we just want to make sure that's the strongest and most robust process it can be. And I think there's definitely, as we've seen in the Audit Wales report, there's areas that we can be focusing on with that. So yeah, I think you've just pulled out a really important theme for us that we are going to be looking at and see if we can strengthen that too. Thank you.
That's great. Appreciate that. Oh, sorry, Councillor Ross, do you want to come back in?
No, sorry, it's just finger slipping on the button. Sorry.
Yeah, that's great. No, that's fine. Absolutely fine. That's great. Thanks for bringing that, Lee. It's obviously a massively important piece of work. And just to recap, then, in terms of the timeline, we're looking for was it the draft report in around autumn time, and then the full final approval process in December of this year. Yeah.
That's correct. Yes, if we can get the consultation process around about October time, so people will be able to contribute to that stage, and then we should be going through the approval process towards the end of the calendar year. So hopefully get that all tidied up by the end of December.
Perfect. That's great. Excellent. Really appreciate it. I say again, really important piece of work for the authority. So thanks very much for bringing that today. Okay, on to the next item then, which is item 6 on your agendas, which is levelling up grant process and criteria. And we've got Jane here. Jane, yeah, Jane and Mark, or just you, Jane? Yeah, the two of you. Yeah, doubling up. That's good. Do you want to take over, Jane?
Yes, thank you, Chair. As you can hear me, I'm going to attempt to share my screen, which always worries me a little bit because I never know if it's going to work. So we've just got a few slides really just to take us through this afternoon in terms of the new Levelling Up Fund. But hang on a second. Let's hope it works then. I've got to share it with this one, haven't I? Yeah.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. I'll see that. Yeah. Okay, excellent. There we go. Okay, so yeah, just a bit of background really. So in May, there was a report taken and agreed through Cabinet in terms of the additional revenue provision for the residual leftover bit of the Economic Recovery Fund for 23-24, and one of the lines in that report was looking for an approved scheme, which was being approved, for £1 million and called Levelling Up, and that proposed investment. And that proposed investment was to target and support areas of multiple deprivations and those communities of need. So really, obviously, we're committed to the levelling up inequalities across our communities. And as very much we've heard from in terms of feeding in with the tackling poverty strategy, but looking for this fund, so it intends to improve services and facilities in the communities and those communities of deprivation. So really what we're here today is just to seek your views on what actually would be the criteria, or what we could do with this, based on previous experience of the levelling up the ERF fund that has been out before, and a couple more options, which I'm going to hand over to Mark now just to go through, if that's okay, Chair.
Right, thanks. Yeah. Sorry. Hi all. As you said, my name is Mark Osney. I'm the Commission Team Leader for Swansea Council. Yeah, so the purpose of this report is to present the background, as Jane just did there, and then look at information on priority areas, how we identify those priority areas, and possible solutions for this grant funding. Looking at current schemes and grants available, and potentially look at the next criteria process and the next steps. So in terms of priority areas, we could utilize the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation to identify what the priority areas would be. In identifying the most deprived areas, using the wind, we could look at the most deprived, the Swansea's areas that are in the 10 most deprived lower super output areas in Wales. Yeah, absolutely. So as an example of how we could target this funding. So in 2019, there were 17 areas in Swansea in the top 10% of the most deprived areas in Wales. As you can see from the list, I won't go through, or may not be able to see from the list, it's not very clear. You know, I won't go through all the areas and percentages, but clearly they are centred on 4 different localities within Swansea. That includes Penderry, Eastside, Town Hill, and Castle, and Morrison. Cool. Okay, so as with all grant funding, you know, we would look to establish a criteria and a targeting. This would provide a focus for the grant and enable us to, you know, make decisions and see where we intend to target the funding. You know, so within projects and different grants, you know, there could be capital or revenue, or in fact a mixture of both. So examples of these would be if it's capital, improving infrastructures within communities, and revenue would be more around developing services, new services, or the third option would be increasing existing services where there is an evidence of need. And then looking at the different criteria, we could also include, will the funding benefit all ages, or, you know, different areas, you know, different themes, and also who's eligible to apply. So is it third sector, you know, council services, or private businesses? When we look at grants, we can look at different aspects. We also look at, you know, good practice. So we want to give you some examples of recent grant programs that have been delivered in Swansea. So the first that we're looking at is Swansea Spaces. So this was founded in 2023, and it was from Welsh Government allocated funding to local authorities last November in response to the cost of living to establish warm hubs. Swansea received a grant of just over £83,000 through a grant process, and through a grant process, £95,000 was awarded to 71 successful applicants. The additional funding was secured via various other grant funding, such as the Direct Food Grant and the Social Isolation Fund. There was a directory of Swansea spaces created during the winter, and there's over 90 spaces listed across Swansea. The Welsh Government funding that supported the spaces had to be spent by the 31st of March 2023. And learning from this work tells us that, as well as providing warm and welcoming places for people to meet new relationships, and people have been less socially isolated as a result. The Swansea Spaces Directory remains live, and the intention is to keep it running all year round. Feedback from the space organisers is that they want to continue because they see the difference it's making made for real people. Those that are continuing to provide spaces are doing so with very limited resources, and in many cases have had to cut back on their offer since funding has ceased. There are some spaces that had to cease activity completely when the funding ran out, but would continue should resources become available again. Another example is Coast, creating opportunities across Swansea together. So Coast evolved from Summer of Fun and the Winter of Wellbeing programmes, which were both previously funded via Welsh Government in 2021 and 21-22. In Swansea, we have identified the benefits and the impact of these programmes, so the provision was continued in 2023 this year via an application for shared prosperity funding. Originally, we had planned to have a year-long activity programme based on Summer Fun and Winter Wellbeing, which was then named Coast, and we extended the remit. So Summer of Fun originally was a children, young person and family initiative, and within Swansea we developed that further to include 50+ projects in the Winter of Wellbeing. So in terms of the year-long activity process, we plan to again reach both ages and stages. Due to the demand, we decided we had £1 million worth of shared prosperity funding, which has been really excellent and, you know, appreciative over the 2 years. And then but the evaluation panel recently met, and due to the demand, there was a criteria for the projects to ensure that we met targeted need. We received over 160 applications with over £800,000 worth of requests. We were able to fund 135 projects with a combined total of £525,760. Obviously, that was purely based on the summer. We aimed purely at the summer due to the demand, really. Thirdly is the Economic Recovery Fund. So there was a £20 million package of support for our communities, which aimed to ensure nobody was left behind as we emerged from the pandemic. There's a range of support across a number of communities and across a number of themes. These themes included school meal prices frozen for that financial year, more than 20 new and upgraded children's play areas, investments in shop fronts and commercial areas, extra parking promotions for outlay in retail areas, free Wi-Fi in select communities, free use of non-3G sports recreation playing fields for sports groups, charities and fetes, more dog waste bins and extra resources to tackle littering, weeding and overflowing bins, more investments for road repairs, extra resources to tackle blocks, drains and flooding. When we looked at the ERF programme, there's 160 programmes funded. Out of those 160, 53 were classed as Swansea-wide or approximately Swansea-wide. There were different headings that said Swansea-wide. So we kind of added all them together. 15 were targeted in the west of Swansea, 15 were targeted in Castle and Morriston, 18 in East Side and Clydach, 6 were in Townhill and Penderry, 9 targeted in the areas of Gorseinon, Pontypridd and Gravesend, and there were 43 in other more sporadic kind of one-off different areas in Swansea. In looking at any new funding, we would look at the ERF report to ensure that we've assessed gaps and whether they are in relation to what activities programmes were delivered or what areas haven't received funding. Okay, so there are what we class as 4 potential options. In terms of the grant funding, we could look at one of the options or combination of 2, 3, or even all 4 of the options. So option number 1. So a new levelling up grant. So this will be based on information that we've already discussed. The new grant would need to look at who is targeted, how it is targeted, and who can bid for it. So is it for third sector and private sector and also council areas? Is it purely based in deprived areas? What would the target and type of resort, the criteria and the type of support could be agreed via the committee. The purpose of this grant would be to support organisations to provide additional resources prioritised within targeted areas, but it doesn't necessarily have to be limited to targeted areas. It could also be, they could be the target, but not necessarily just those areas. Option number 2 would be a continuation of the ERF. So we would look to provide funding based on the original concept of ERF, including continuation of funding existing projects where appropriate, because some have already been completed, or initiate a new round of ERF projects based on the original concept. The third option would be support continuation of warm hubs and deliver an open round grant process targeting expanding the warm hub Swansea spaces principles and provisions. This is particularly key with the winter approaching and obviously the cost of living not subsiding, in fact increasing. Option 4 would be supporting Coast. So the initial idea of Coast was to build on the summer of fun and winter wellbeing to develop an all year round activity programme. So far, the funding obtained from Shared Prosperity across 23-24 and 24-25 enabled us to have an open round grant for the summer. But as I've already mentioned, in this year, we can only support summer provision, but clearly the evidence shows there's an identified need to continue this in the winter. Whichever approach is decided in terms of providing this funding is agreed, we would ensure that there's an evaluation monitoring process implemented, which would demonstrate the impact, outcomes, and outputs of this programme. Evidence and data of impact is essential for a number of reasons in terms of grant funding. One, obviously, is public money, so we need to ensure that there's value for money, but also as well, we need to ensure that this funding actually makes a difference to the people of Swansea and our communities. And it also then provides evidence in terms of what we need to do next in terms of targeting and wider public funds. Expected outcomes and outputs could include increased facilities in targeted areas, improved infrastructure, increased activities within targeted areas, increased services within those areas, supporting wards that are yet to benefit from ERF, promoting underrepresented targeted themes, example, local economy, well-being, community, people and jobs, promoting interaction with the corporate priorities, promoting the funding opportunities through workshops and support. And those are sort of the community outputs and outcomes. But we'd also obviously look at the individualized outcomes as well. So, you know, people that are telling us that their emotional health and well-being is better off because of this, how individuals have benefited from this from this funding. And, you know, people saying that they feel safer in their communities, or they feel that there's an improvement in their community facilities as well. People feeling happier and healthier due to these activities and opportunities, and people developing new skills or experiences, new opportunities. Targeting and supporting areas of multiple deprivation will enable us to have equality, inclusion, and equity across communities by increasing services and facilities in a number of venues. Looking at the timeline, obviously, the initial timeline of this funding is March 24. So just to give the committee an idea of timelines, if we could agree the process in August 23, we could launch a fund at the beginning of September, and then giving people enough time to apply for that and hear about it, because obviously it's important to communicate these opportunities to as widely as we possibly can. The applications could close at the end of September. We have infrastructure in place to enable us to hold evaluation panels and inform projects within October, and hopefully start the projects the same month. All projects would be completed by the 31st of March 24. We would then set sort of a month then for us to look at evaluation and monitoring to be returned. There will be a quality assurance process running throughout the delivery phase to ensure all projects are being delivered and are of sufficient standard. And this will be coordinated by the partnership and commissioning team under Jane.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. Thanks. Thank you. So just so really what we're seeking to do today is just to see your thoughts and your views, and there's some questions on the screen there about in terms of the areas you'd like us to target in terms of those. Are we, you know, is the WIM the right place to go in terms of those targets, or there's something else? And then in terms of the options, is it a combination of the different options, or is it just one? And just think just those questions really are thinking, if we're just targeting deprived areas, is it just those areas that are prioritised, or is there opportunities to go wider depending on need and what comes others? Are looking at those areas that may not be included, so those non-geographical areas of need, making sure that we're covering that off as well, and understanding how we can agree and that what the criteria would be for the fund, so, you know, before we move on to the next steps. I guess some of the other things around the risks and interdependencies that we're going through our minds at this moment is it is a one-off fund, so it's like the original economic recovery fund, so it will end into the end of March 2024, but then is there a possibility that we could, if we've got some deliveries to be needed into 24-25, and roll that forward? Because actually, if you've got a bit of a longer lead in time in terms of impact, would that be better? Just making sure that obviously evaluation to show the impact and the outcomes of the fund is going to be critical to make sure that you know we're showing what the fund is doing. Making sure it doesn't duplicate and how it fits with other funds. So we've talked about other funds that have gone out or have been out in the last 12 months. But there's a lot of money in terms of shared prosperity and of the UK government's shared prosperity fund that is out at the moment. So just making sure that we don't duplicate anything like that. Making sure that we're obviously adhering to our grant giving policy that's just gone through now in terms of making sure that we're acting it with good governance. But then obviously the biggest risk to us is around that time scale, sometimes giving us time to allocate the funding out and then time for people to deliver and apply for it so that as the Mark described the timetable there, it is really quite tight. So we're kind of up against it, but we views and thoughts about best options as we move forward and to take this forward. So it's a great opportunity and good to see that we've got that money to get out there for our communities, but we want to make sure that we do it in the best possible way so that it's meaningful. Thanks, Chair. If I pause there, okay.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Thanks both. Yeah, really interesting stuff. This feels like a bit of a responsibility, actually, doesn't it, to think about how we can best spend this money. I've got Les indicated. Before I bring Les in, Hayley or Alison, is this fall under one of your portfolios? Under yours, Al. Did you want to add anything before we as a committee say anything? I'll bring you in first then, Les, if that's okay. Just thought, as Al is here, is there anything you want to add, Al?
Only really that, like everything, they got tight time limits on them. We've tried to put as short a turnaround as possible on application forms so you can get the money out of the door as quickly as possible. You try and prep people that they come in. So I know there's some went out, like even if you take the third sector one that went out the other day, some of the organizations were sitting ready to get it in as soon as. There's it needs a lot of partnership work in. But I think as well that, it's a hard one. We want to get the money out, but I think sometimes it's difficult for people to know what they can do with it. And, to come up with those ideas and everything. So I'm open to questions, and Jane is here and Mark and everything. And, we're grateful of this money. Obviously, it really is not a patch. It doesn't even touch what we used to get from European funding, but we got to make this go as far as possible, really. So, whether, as you said, whether it extends out into other areas now is up for debate. And Hayley and I have just come from the research with the warm spaces, and again, all this was coming up there, wasn't it, Hayley? There's lots of poverty, but sometimes it's better hidden in other areas. Do you know what I mean? Or you could be acid rich and cash poor, and so it's difficult sometimes to just say to always focus on the same areas because we know we've got so much poverty. So it's a big ask, really, but feel free to ask questions.
Okay. Right, thanks. Okay, Les first and then Yvonne.
Yeah, my first question is, have we got a bit more time to think about this? Because I think, as you said, the last thing I want to do is come out with ideas I am going to come out with a couple of ideas, but I want to have more time to think about it because it's so important that we use this money, which, as you say, is hardly anything. When you think nearly 800k was onto just one project, that's 4/5 of the money gone. So it's not a huge amount, but so we've got to make sure that we use it as best we possibly can. So I would like to have a little bit more time to feed in if I've got more ideas. Just a couple of things off the top of my head. I think warm hubs is an absolute must. This next 6 months is going to be even worse for some people, and that was such a huge help. So definitely that would be money well spent. Probably the same is true for the other two funds. So I suppose I'd be tempted to think that we do a combination of all four. So we have one pot of money that's accessible for anybody, for any kind of idea they've got, and then continue the other three existing projects, because from everything I've heard, they all sound pretty good. Warm hubs, though, 100%. The other thing I was going to say, going back to earlier in the meeting when we were talking about affordable credit, I think if you look at the other side of that coin, there are people who are convinced that if they go to what I call a legal loan shark, it's the best thing since sliced bread. The obvious one is Bright House, and the number of stories I've read about people who've gone there and think they're doing a fantastic deal. But if somebody could actually make them realise that, no, you end up paying about 3 times as much. And that is a project I would love somebody to come forward. And the word I can't stand this word educate, because I always think it means you know better than somebody. Whereas in this instance, I just want us to get information out to people. They still then make the final decision. If they still want to use Bright House, fine, that's up to them. But the idea is, can we get more and more information about how, rather than going to these kind of places, you go to somewhere where you're going to get far more value for your money. I know it's been going on for decades, but if we can still make a bit more inroads into that. So I would welcome anybody who came and asked for money to fund a project that would look into that. Thank you.
Right, thanks, Les. Yvonne, did you want to come in? I see your hand's gone down now.
No, thanks, Chair. I'll hold it.
Okay, all right. Does anybody else want to ask anything? I mean, what I wanted to kind of what was striking me. Yeah,
Chair,
well,
sorry, Councillor Baker in the room has indicated she wants to speak.
okay, sorry, Maya,
Thank
come
you.
in there.
I'm living in the Penderry area, which is classed as deprived. We don't like to say it's deprived. People like to hide that. And at the end of the day, we had credit union up there years ago. They moved from the area. Credit union was doing brilliant. They got a lot of young people just starting work, coming out to college. We got a lot of older men in their 30s, 40s, haven't got a bank account. They go through their sister's bank account, or their brothers, or their mothers, or their fathers. That's the only way they can get a bank account. As they said to me, I said, well, I haven't got money for a driving licence. I haven't got money for a passport. Those are the forms of identification you were asked for when applying for a bank account. 30s and over, if they haven't got any of these photo identification, they haven't got a bank account. So they'll put their wages into parents or whatever, family member or friends' bank account, which can sometimes mess with that person's bank account that the money is going into. That person ends up then, oh, why have you got so much in that bank account when you should be paying more rent? They've got universal credit. They check the bank. Why is that so much money going into that bank account? So that's putting the person that's already working and doing well for themselves back into poverty. It pushes them back down that one ladder. So there is a need for universal credit to wise up on this, that people are using other people's bank accounts. And with credit union, you could open a bank account with them, and which then the wages could go into, which is needed back up on estates, big estates like Townhill, Penlan, Blaenamice, Morriston, you name it. We all got our little pockets there.
Thanks, Maya. Okay, I think one of the challenges that we've got with this money is it's not a massive amount. It's a finite amount of money, and it's a very short time scale that we've got. I mean, when Mark was talking, the thing that struck me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but two of the projects that you were talking about, the warm hubs and Coast, I think it was called, seem to already have some evidence in terms of the impact that they're making and evidence for a continued need. So I mean, and it's, again, this is just a bit like Les. Really, this is off the top of my head. The thing that's struck me, and I've got a bit of personal experience setting up internal grants in my day job for cost of living stuff. So it just struck me that you've got two projects there that are up and running, that have got some evidence of impact and outcomes, positive outcomes, and have obviously evidence a continued need going forward, and already have systems and processes set up that we could feed into, which would obviously have huge benefits in terms of time to get that up and running, eligibility, etc. So one of the questions I wanted to ask was, presumably those two projects weren't targeted specifically at the areas of deprivation, or were they?
No, they weren't targeted. They were open for everyone. But we did. I know the Swansea spaces. I'm looking at Lee sat next to me. Sorry. When they went to assess that, they had a look at those areas to make sure that everything was covered. And I think in terms of coast, I'll look at Mark at the other side of me, that we do take a look in terms of what areas they're going in to sort of distribute it out, make sure it's equally, so that although it's not targeted specifically, there is we make a conscious effort to make sure that it doesn't duplicate or go into only one area, but you know, but that's based on who comes forward or what comes forward, rather than us going and targeting it. Does that make sense?
If I can just add
Sorry,
to the Jane.
hang on, if I got to turn mine off and then you go back on. I'm gonna say Mark, go on.
Sorry, yeah, thanks, yeah. And just to add to what you said, no, it is open to all. There is a criteria around it, and you know, just by the nature of the applications that you get, we've looked at the data, and £350,000 out of the £500,000 went to geographical and non-geographical areas of need. You know, in terms of the application. So although it's not targeted purely at those areas, it is, you know, predominantly a lot of people will apply for those areas. And something that Councillor Pugh mentioned earlier, indeed, you know, poverty isn't just deprived areas, it is wider than that. There's pockets of deprivation in terms of other areas when you look at assets as well. And also it's the poverty of opportunity and access as well. So it is about, you know, ensuring that it's the non-geographical areas of need that we're looking at potentially, as well as the geographical areas of need.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks both. Hayley, did you want to come in?
Yes, please. Chair, if I may. Myself and Alison are here at the Liberty Stadium, or Swansea.com Stadium as it's known now, with a research project around the warm spaces funding and the benefits of that. And obviously this can feed into this committee, the findings. But what it was Swansea-wide, what we were very conscious of when we were looking at setting up the directory was to make sure that there was provision across the whole of Swansea, because we are very much aware that cost of living crisis, fuel crisis, it isn't just about those areas of high deprivation. You know, we've got to capture everybody in this, because financial pressures are being felt by everybody, whether or not you've got a big property to heat or a smaller property. I think Alison mentioned it earlier, you could be asset rich but cash poor. So that was something that we were very mindful of. And the research, some of the findings and the feedback today was around, it's not just the warmth of a building,
No.
but it's the warmth of the feeling as well, and those social connections, the kindness, the friendship, the building of networks as well, support networks, and having somewhere where you can present and have information, advice and guidance for all sorts of things that are going on in your life, whether it's family information service or your local area coordinator, you know, your local policing teams. People were finding that they were getting so much more out of it than what the initial, you know, warm space idea was. So yeah, I think that this would be really beneficial for the committee to have those findings presented.
Yeah, thanks, Hayley. That's really interesting. Okay, so I mean, I'm taking on board what Leslie was saying at the beginning, really, as well. Jane and Mark, and the last thing we want to do is put something else in front of you. But I think my own feelings, as I've just mentioned, is that I think one of the key tests of us using public money well is that when it's evidence based, isn't it? Where we've shown impact, that we build on that. So we've got an opportunity. We've got this money. It's only a finite amount of money. I think Miles spoke really eloquently about the challenges around credit, but reality is that's probably something we need to address. But whether we can do that with this pot of money is another thing. So I don't know. I'm thinking we've got those two projects with evidence behind them. Maybe we could put something like a workshop in, Jane. Do you think? Because obviously this committee only meets every 6 weeks now. And I think maybe it would be worthwhile having something to where we could have like a workshop environment where people like Alison and Hayley could come along, a few others from the departments, maybe other cabinet members if they're interested, other councillors potentially, not just members of this committee, to look at kind of the options with that. Yvonne, do you want to come in?
Yes, thanks, Chair. It was just to say that with the credit union, I know that I cannot remember the lady's name. I'm sorry. She said that is something the council is already looking at. But I spoke to someone this morning, and the thing is, the credit union are now asking for those things like ID, like passport. So I find like Leslie, once they've moved to the high street, they've become more high street, let's say, and they no longer seem to take into account, because when I worked for a women's organisation before, they used to come and open accounts, etc. But now I find there are quite a few hurdles that what I call regular people are finding it difficult to jump. Whereas before, I would say to an asylum seeker, go to the credit union. They're now asking for the same things as the bank, which precludes someone like an asylum seeker having their money paid into an account. I'm just saying we need to take that into account when we suggest some of these things. Thanks, Chair.
Chair, can I come back? Yeah, absolutely. I think a kind of workshop, I think it's clear that none of us, your anxieties are our anxieties in terms of rushing into something and putting something out and just, squandering it away without some kind of real meaningful thought behind it. I think the the Swansea spaces and coast, there is an evidence base. So I guess we could put something, there is. You could say, all right, well, we'll fund a part of that. I mean, the warm spaces, I think, was less than 100,000. It wasn't a huge amount of money, so it still leaves about 100. Was it? Was 92. So there's so even if we made a decision to done that, there's still opportunity. I think in terms of coming back for a workshop on really what would be meaningful. I hadn't realised that when you say in terms of the bank account situation, that is just horrendous. And there is something about that, and that would hit. Amy's going to come in. She'll tell me I didn't realise that, but there is. And then about the campaigns or something like Bright House, Leslie, to give the example, all of those kind of things. So I do think there is something we can probably do together. And I know that if it's every 6 weeks, or we would, and Alison can advise on how we do a workshop, because it's a little bit different, isn't it, in terms of the formal paper. But just to talk about that and give some more thought to it, because I do think you're right. We don't need to rush it. We need to do it properly, don't we? I think.
Yeah.
I think we could do that. Yeah.
I don't know what others were thinking, but as you were talking, I was thinking that perhaps what would be useful is as you say, a workshop wouldn't be bound by the same rules as the committee, and we don't tend to using them too often. But I think in this instance, it's probably appropriate. I think one of the things that maybe would be useful, Jane, is if you could draw up kind of a brief paper with the pluses and minuses of approaches based on kind of sort of a variety of things, a variety of measures, from time scales to practicalities and things like that. I know some of these things are things that we're all going to want to do, but between now and March, getting them up and running, finding eligibility criteria, coming up with an application form and the stuff that you need, and an outcomes measuring tool or whatever. Whereas for some of the projects that have already got those things in place, they're obviously going to be quicker to sort out and to set up. So maybe something like that. Does that make sense, does Amy want to come in at all on this?
Yeah, that does make sense. That's thanks, Chair. Sorry. Go
Yeah,
on,
I
Ellie.
come in with a point just on the basic bank accounts actually, and just sorry, it's almost a separate point, isn't it? So two things. We'll follow up with the credit unions about the ID they're asking. We can certainly ask our colleagues there in terms of what can be done about that. But as a part of the affordable credit policy, one of the areas we did look at was basic bank accounts as well. Because if colleagues remember back when Universal Credit first came in Swansea, this in December 17, this was raised as an issue then. And we did a bit of work promoting which banks did provide basic bank accounts, which didn't need quite the same information. So there's we can revisit that work. And the third aspect with this as well is I just double checked with Lee now, this is still the case. Some of our employability schemes will provide small funds to support people to get ID they need. So if people do need that ID to get a provisional driving license, for example, or to get the money needed to get a passport, we can fund that through the employability schemes, through barriers funds with those. So people need to be signed up to the programs and the support, but it is there available because we see this, you know, it clearly is a barrier, not just in terms of bank accounts, but other aspects. So there's three actions we can follow up there.
Great, thanks, Amy. Les, you want to come back in?
Yes, please. Hopefully 3 quickies. One, totally agree with Mayor. The word deprived is awful, but I suppose we're stuck with it. But I think it's such a grotty word. And also, I think it should just be open to everywhere across Swansea. This idea of the only places where there are poor people are deprived, bonkers. Totally bonkers. And finally, far more positive, I am so pleased that we've got this money to spend. All I can say is let's all do our best to make sure it's spent wisely. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Les. I think we all agree with that. So, I mean, in terms of taking away, Jane, is it, you know, if this seems that sounds unreasonable, please say. But if we could maybe look at doing a workshop, I know August isn't great, but that's kind of the timescales we've got really. Otherwise, we're on the clock, aren't we? And while we don't want to rush it equally, we are against the clock. So I don't know how everybody feels, but maybe early August, maybe second week of August, possibly. I don't know. Come in, Jane. What do you think? You're probably on leave here.
No, not till the first couple of weeks of September, once the children have gone back to school. But we were having this myself and Hayley and the leader was having this conversation earlier in the week about a different pot of money, and I think that if we think that actually it would be better if we took a more considered approach and took a bit longer to sort it out, with some really clear outcomes and on the basis of taking longer, and that would span into another financial year. I think it's probably we could do almost like a business justification case that would help people understand why we're, you know, I think once there's a time delay, I think we were talking about, in terms of once the money is there, and then by the time it gets out and by the time we have the conversations about it and then doing something about it, it's understanding that. So I can take it as an action and to do that paper, just so we can have permission to run it a bit longer than this financial year, and then we can look for it'll probably be a date, probably September time is better then for us.
Yeah.
I can link with Alison in terms of the committee, in terms of a workshop and what that looks like, if we're all happy with that. Our cabinet members are happy with that as well, if we take that approach. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Excellent. Thanks, guys.
Okay, yes, great. Okay, any other comments or questions to Mark and Jane before we move on?
Just one.
Yeah, come in. Al.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And thank you, Lee, Jane, Mark, for a comprehensive presentation and cover an awful lot of ground. It's just a thought, really, following on from Leslie's warm hub theme. I mean, just prior to the pandemic, we ran quite a successful night shelter program around the town for those who were homeless. Of course, during the pandemic, lots of the homeless were housed, but that's not the case any longer. And there's quite a few that I see is sort of sleeping rough around the town. I wonder if that's something that we could introduce into the programme over the next couple of months, and to discuss the reintroduction, I would think, of the night shelter, because it did run quite successfully. The one that I helped in, which was St Thomas's Church in Swansea East, and it served a pretty good purpose, really. And And I'm sure that during the months, as Leslie sort of predicted, during the winter months, you know, from January on to sort of early March, the evenings and the nights do get pretty cold, you know, and wet at those times. So that's something I think we could think about. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks very much. Okay. Yeah. That's great. Okay. Okay, we've put it on to the final item on the agenda then, which is the draft work plan. It's just occurred to me, Jane, that actually our next committee meeting is the 11th of September. And at the minute, Alison, I think we've only got the volunteer strategy on there, haven't we? Pretty sure that's correct.
Yes, it is.
So I mean, potentially we could bring back the leveling up grant process if you were in at that point. I know
Or
you
if you
probably
or if you wanted to do a workshop before the main committee or something, if you wanted to have that like the hour before,
yeah.
it's an option.
Yeah, that if you were happy with that, I'm gonna defer to my colleagues who are sat alongside me because I'm actually not in the country on the 11th of September. But it doesn't need me because they're much more knowledgeable than I am. But yeah, we can look at the dates and we can sort something out for that rather than leave it another cycle. But
Yeah.
and do that. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be good. That would
Okay.
be good, I think. Everybody else okay with that in the committee? Happy with that? Yeah. So we're looking around 3 o'clock on the 11th of September, something like that.
All right. Brilliant. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, officer colleagues as well. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Okay, that's all we've got on the agenda for today. So thanks very much for everybody for your attendance. We haven't got anything in August. I say the next meeting is the 11th of September. So hopefully see you all then. Have a good summer. And thanks very much for coming today, and thanks to the officers for all your support.
Thanks. Take care. Bye.
All the best, guys. Take care. Bye.